Don't go to that meeting, the boy said. He couldn't have been more than 9 years old, standing barefoot on the wet pavement outside the parking garage, holding a crumpled paper bag like it was the most important thing in the world. Please, sir, don't go. Stuart Alderman had been walking to his car for 37 years without anyone stopping him. He was 61 years old, a senior partner at one of the most respected law firms in Charlotte, North Carolina, a man whose time was measured in 6-minute billing increments. And he did not stop for strangers. Not in parking garages, not ever. But something about the way the boy said it, not begging, not performing, made him pause. "Excuse me?" Stuart said. The boy looked up at him with dark, steady eyes. "The meeting tonight, at the Hargrove building. You shouldn't go." Stuart studied him. The child was thin, wearing a school sweatshirt 2 sizes too big, the kind with a peeling iron-on logo. His sneakers were on the ground beside him, soaking wet as if he'd run through puddles to get here. "How do you know about any meeting?" Stuart asked. The boy didn't answer right away. He looked back toward the street, then at Stuart again. "I heard them talk in the parking lot behind my mom's restaurant. 2 men. They said your name." Stuart felt something shift in his chest. Not fear exactly. Something older than fear. He'd been a lawyer long enough to know when a situation had edges to it. "Come here," he said, stepping back toward the wall out of the lane. "Tell me exactly what you heard." The boy's name was Tobias. Not Toby. He was clear about that. And his mother ran a Vietnamese sandwich shop 2 blocks east on Trade Street. He was waiting for her to finish closing up, sitting on the loading dock with his homework, when he heard 2 men arguing in the alley behind the dumpsters. "They didn't see me," Tobias said. "I had my earbuds in, but they weren't playing anything. I do that sometimes so people don't talk to me." "Smart," Stuart said. "One of them kept saying your name. Stuart Alderman. Said it like 4 times. Said you were coming to sign something tonight and that it needed to go a different way. What does that mean, a different way?" Tobias chewed the inside of his cheek. The other man said not to worry about the paperwork, that you wouldn't make it to the table. He paused. He laughed when he said it. It wasn't a good laugh. Stuart was quiet for a moment. The parking garage hummed around them, the ventilation fans cycling. Somewhere above, a car door slammed. Did you see what they looked like? One was tall, gray jacket, like a suit but no tie. The other one was shorter, had a beard. He was the one laughing. Stuart pulled out his phone. He stared at the screen for a moment without unlocking it. The meeting tonight was at 7 o'clock. Hargrove Capital Partners, 15th floor. He'd been preparing for it for 6 weeks. It was the largest private equity restructuring he'd managed in his career, a $340 million portfolio, and the signing was the final step. His name was on the documents. His reputation was attached to the outcome, and his name, apparently, had been spoken in an alley behind a sandwich shop by men he didn't recognize. "What's your mother's name?" Stuart asked. "Linda," Tobias said. "Linda Ozzie." "Okay, Tobias." Stuart crouched down slightly so he wasn't looming over the boy. "I need you to do something for me. I need you to go back inside and stay with your mother. Don't tell anyone else what you told me. Can you do that?" The boy nodded. Then, before Stuart could straighten up, "Are you going to be okay?" It was such a simple question. Stuart hadn't been asked that by anyone in a long time. Not his assistant, not his colleagues, not his wife. "I'm working on it," he said. He didn't go to his car. He went back up the elevator to the 14th floor of his building, let himself back into the office with his key card, and sat down at his desk in the dark. The cleaning crew moved down the hall. He could hear the vacuum, the rattle of a cart. He didn't turn on his lamp. Stuart Alderman had built his career on pattern recognition. Not the kind lawyers talked about in briefs, the deeper kind. The kind you developed after decades of watching people lie in conference rooms and smile while they did it. He knew when something was off. He'd known it for weeks if he was being honest with himself. He just hadn't wanted to name it yet. The Hargrove deal had come to his firm through a referral from his junior partner, a man named Craig Dunmore. Craig had brought in the client 18 months ago. Hargrove Capital, represented by their general counsel, a smooth-talking man named Vincent, who wore expensive watches and never quite answered a direct question. Stuart had flagged several things in the documents during the drafting phase. Minor inconsistencies in the asset schedules. A beneficial ownership clause buried on page 47 that didn't match the representations on page 3. He'd raised them. Craig had said they were drafting oversights. The client had sent revisions. Stuart had accepted them. Now, he sat in the dark and thought about a 9-year-old boy who ran through puddles to warn a stranger. He opened his laptop. He pulled up the Hargrove files, all of them, going back to the first term sheet. He started from the beginning, not the summary, not the final draft, the beginning. By 9 o'clock, his coffee was cold and he'd filled 6 pages of a legal pad. By 10:30, he'd found it. It wasn't subtle once you knew to look. The beneficial ownership structure had been modified 3 times across different draft versions, always explained as corrections, always in documents sent late on Fridays. Each version shifted a controlling interest in one of the subsidiary funds. Hargrove Fund 3, from the named investors to an offshore entity called Pelican Bay Holdings. Stewart had approved each correction without stacking them against each other. When he stacked them now, the shift was clear. If the deal closed tonight with his signature, he would be certifying a transaction that effectively transferred $80 million in investor assets to an entity he had never verified, could not identify, and that existed in a jurisdiction with no disclosure requirements. He would be the attorney of record. He would be the one who signed. He sat back. The office was completely quiet now. Outside the window, Charlotte glittered in the dark. He thought about Craig Dunmore. Craig, who had been at the firm for 11 years. Craig, who had gone to Duke Law, who had a wife and 3 kids in Ballantyne, who coached soccer on weekends and brought kolaches to the Monday partner meetings. Craig, who had brought in Hargrove Capital and who had smoothed over every concern Stewart had raised every single time with that easy smile and a logical-sounding explanation. Stewart picked up his phone and called his friend Dennis Hartwell, who was not a lawyer, but was the chief investigator for the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Western District of North Carolina, and who owed Stewart a favor from 2019 that had never been repaid. Dennis picked up on the second ring. "I need 45 minutes of your evening," Stewart said. "It's 11 o'clock. I know what time it is." A pause. "Give me the address." They met at a diner on South Boulevard that Stewart had been going to since 1998. The owner, a Greek man named Petros, never asked why people came in at strange hours. He just brought coffee. Stewart laid the legal pad on the table. He laid the printed documents next to it. 80 pages he'd pulled from his files with annotations in red pen down the margins. Dennis Hartwell was a compact man with a gray mustache and the unhurried manner of someone who had spent 30 years watching people make irreversible decisions. He read everything without speaking. He turned pages slowly. He drank his coffee. He did not react. When he finished, he straightened the stack and set it in front of him with both hands flat on top. "When is the meeting?" he said. "It was at 7, Stewart said. "I didn't go." "Do they know you didn't go?" "Craig has sent me 4 texts in the last 3 hours asking where I am. I haven't responded." Dennis looked at the documents again. "This Pelican Bay Holdings. You ran it?" "I tried. It's registered in the Cayman Islands, incorporated 18 months ago, the same month Craig brought Hargrove to the firm. Director is listed as a nominee service. No disclosed beneficiaries. You should have caught this sooner." "I know." Dennis said it without judgment, which was worse than if he'd said it with judgment. Stewart had been thinking the same thing all evening. He'd been too close to it, too invested in the outcome. He'd wanted the deal to be clean because he'd needed it to be clean, and that was exactly the kind of thinking that got lawyers disbarred. "I'm not here to protect myself," Stewart said. "I'm here because I think there are investors who are about to lose $80 million, and I have the documents to stop it." Dennis looked at him for a long moment. "The 2 men in the alley," he said. "The ones the boy overheard. I don't know who they are, but you have a guess." Stewart wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "Hargrove's general counsel, Vincent. He uses a personal security consultant. I've seen the man twice, in the elevator and in the lobby. Tall, gray jacket. He doesn't work for the firm. He's not on any retainer we've invoiced. And the other one? I don't know." Dennis nodded slowly. He picked up his phone and sent a text. Then he set the phone face down on the table. "I'm going to need you to give me everything. Every document, every email, every draft. And I need a formal statement about the boy, what he heard, when, where. He's 9 years old." "I know. But if this goes where I think it's going, his account of tonight may matter. I won't put him in a room. I just need a written record of what you remember." Stewart thought about Tobias standing barefoot on wet pavement with his school sweatshirt and his crumpled paper bag. A boy who ran through puddles to stop a stranger because something in him said it was the right thing to do. A boy who asked, simply and without any agenda, if Stewart was going to be okay. "I'll write it down," Stewart said. What happened next took longer than a single night, which was the part no one tells you about when they talk about justice. Justice is not a door that swings open cleanly. It grinds. Dennis Hartwell brought the documents to the U.S. Attorney's Office the following morning. A formal inquiry opened within 48 hours under seal. Stewart retained outside counsel, a firm in Washington, someone who had no connection to Charlotte's legal community and cooperated fully from the first day. The deal did not close. Hargrove Capital's counsel tried to push it through with a different attorney the morning after Stewart didn't show, but the escrow agent had questions, and the questions became a delay, and the delay became an investigation. Craig Dunmore's phone records showed 42 communications with Hargrove's general counsel over the preceding 6 months, including several on days when no work product was produced and no billing entries existed. His personal accounts showed 3 wire transfers from an entity connected to Pelican Bay Holdings, $85,000 in total, received over 14 months. Craig resigned from the firm before he was asked to leave. He retained criminal defense counsel the following week. The 2 men from the alley, the tall one in the gray jacket and the shorter one with the beard, were identified within 10 days. The tall man was a private investigator, licensed in South Carolina, who had done work for Hargrove Capital on previous transactions. The shorter man was a logistics contractor with a prior conviction for fraud in Ohio. Neither of them in the end was charged with anything more serious than conspiracy to obstruct, because the plan, whatever it had been, had never moved past the parking lot. Because a boy had run through puddles. Stewart gave his formal cooperation statement in a conference room in the federal building on West Trade Street. His outside counsels sat beside him. Across the table, a federal prosecutor asked him, at one point, why he hadn't gone to the meeting. Stewart thought about how to answer that. He thought about explaining the documents, the ownership structures, the offshore entity, the months of missed signals that he'd finally assembled into a coherent picture. Instead, he said, "A child warned me." The prosecutor looked up from her notes. "He heard something he shouldn't have heard," Stewart said. "And instead of walking away, he found me and told me. He was 9 years old and he ran through a rainstorm to do it." She wrote something on her pad. Then she looked at him again. "What made you believe him?" Stewart had thought about this too, in the weeks since. What made him stop in that parking garage when he never stopped for anyone? What made him crouch down and listen to a thin boy in a too big sweatshirt instead of checking his watch and moving on? "He wasn't asking for anything," Stewart said. "He just wanted me to be safe. That's not something you can fake." He went back to the sandwich shop on a Tuesday afternoon in early November, when the sky was low and gray and Trade Street smelled like rain. He hadn't called ahead. He didn't want to make it into something formal. Linda Osei was behind the counter when he walked in. She was a small woman with natural hair pulled back and flour on her apron, and she looked at Stewart the way people look at someone they've heard about but haven't met. "Mr. Alderman," she said, "I owe your son a thank you," he said, "and I owe you an apology for involving him in any of it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He came home that night and told me he'd stopped a man from going somewhere dangerous. I told him he was probably just being dramatic." A pause. "He was not just being dramatic." "No, ma'am, he was not." She called Tobias from the back. The boy came out in his school clothes, still wearing his backpack, and looked at Stewart with the same steady eyes as before. Not surprised to see him, not particularly impressed. "Did it work out?" Tobias asked. "It did," Stewart said. The boy nodded as if he'd expected nothing less. Then he set his backpack down and reached into the front pocket and pulled out a slightly bent business card. "I found this on the floor near where I was sitting that night. I think it might be yours." Stewart took it. It was his card. It must have fallen from his pocket in the parking garage. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at Tobias. "Keep it," Stewart said, "in case you ever need a lawyer." The boy thought about this seriously, the way children think about things when they decide to take you at your word. "Okay," he said. He put the card back in his pocket. Outside, the rain started again, tapping against the window of the small shop on Trade Street, and Stewart Alderman sat down at the counter and ordered a sandwich, and for the first time in a very long time, he wasn't thinking about billing increments or portfolio structures, or the careful management of risk. He was thinking about what it meant to be warned by someone who had nothing to gain and everything to lose, and what it said about the world that such warnings still existed, carried on foot through the rain by a 9-year-old boy who simply believed that people ought to look out for each other. He ate his sandwich. He left a good tip. He walked back out into the rain without hurrying, and it felt, strangely, like something he hadn't felt in years. It felt like enough.